We will begin to get a minute and a half to introduce yourself, the office you're seeking, and a question. Please answer and give an overview to our audience. What do you think are the most important solutions at the state, federal, and local level to address the issue of sea level rise and flooding?
My name is Rubin. I'm running for Senate District 30. I think one of the most pertinent things we need to do is something that Palm Beach County is doing already, spending a lot of dollars planting mangroves and orchard reefs and marsh and grassy habitats in communities, which can prevent flooding caused by sea level rise. But I think what we can do individually is that we can be proactive and make sure that we buy enough flood insurance to cover our homes. Anything that we have in our homes that's above, I say $4,000 to $5,000, make sure we raise those to a higher level when the rainstorms come. Some of us can raise the foundations on our homes, some of us can't. If we can't, do like we used to do in Kissimmee, we put it on a trail and move it and take it, put it somewhere else. Make sure that we don't flood. I think that we can protect our communities before this disaster strikes. When the storm season comes, I think we need to start cleaning out those storm drains and getting them all cleaned up. I think we can do that. And if something happens, we can rebuild. But if we rebuild, we got to rebuild, make sure it's stronger when we rebuild. I think the state can do a lot by funding local infrastructures on the state level. Educate the public, and update our local maps that we have when it comes to the storms.
We'll move on now.
My name is Mindy, Koch, House District 81. Thank you guys so much for inviting us to discuss this very vital issue to all Floridians. On the local level, I think we should create better drainage systems, building up our seawalls, deepening our canals, and building cisterns to hold water, along with creating more diverse green spaces, which will also help us bring down the temperature. On the state level, the first thing we should do is acknowledge sea level rise and climate change as two things we should be able to say here in Florida. I think acknowledging the problem is half the issue. We need to invest in passive energy. This is the Sunshine State after all, and we're wasting all this beautiful sunshine and the wonderful wind that comes in off the ocean, and commit more resources to research and creating innovative solutions. And on the federal level, I think we should reinstate flood insurance subsidies, institute a carbon emission tax, and provide money to help, which will provide money to help local communities be able to pay to protect themselves from the effect of sea level rise. When elected, I'm going to look to all of you to help me with solutions to these problems because I'm just an English teacher. Thanks so much for having us.
Next, Bonfiglio.
Hi, my name is Jim Bonfiglio. I'm running for State House District 89. I spent 18 years working in Ocean Ridge government, 13 years planning and zoning, 2 terms as commissioner, 1 year vice mayor, and currently the mayor. So I've had 18 years experience dealing with these issues on the local level. Let me tell you what we've been doing in our town locally to try to address these issues. We're addressing it through our zoning requirements. We're increasing the requirement for permeable land in each lot, so you have to hold more water. We started at 25% permeable land, which roughly amounted to about an hour's worth of 1 inch rain. We're going to increase that. We're requiring more homes to hold more water on their land by increasing the swale area around the house. We're trying to decrease the effect of flooding at the individual house by more mounding, if you will, making the house higher by requiring the house to be built on either more more dirt or putting pylons so they are higher. So when you get the flooding, you don't get the damage inside the house. We're cleaning out our drain pipes. That's something we're doing at the local level. At the state level, what we need is essentially money to help the infrastructure because we put a detention pond in the town that covers about 1/3 of the town. That costs about it costs about $7 million rather than $2,003. And we didn't have any land acquisition costs. It's going to be 3 and 4 times that to handle the flooding right now. Then of course we need to join as a country, we need to join the Paris Climate Accord and deal with climate change. Mr. Caruso.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Caruso. I'm running for Florida House in House Rep District 89. Although the causes of sea level rise have been debated for many years, the effects of it certainly need to be addressed and cannot be ignored. To begin with, we need to start with updating the outdated FEMA flood maps, and we need to bring them up to some of the areas in the flood maps. 100-year flood zones have been flooded twice in the last 10 years, and we need to update those maps. In addition, we need to look at once areas are flooded, we need to look at changing the reconstruction codes to require that buildings and structures that have been demolished or destroyed totally in floods as a result of sea level rise to be rebuilt at higher elevations. And I think that's critical. Any new construction needs to account for these higher elevations also, and the greater flooding that we've had. So we need to look at that in order to stop the redundant building and rebuilding and building and rebuilding and all the waste of money as a result of sea level rise. We need to look towards our national government, the federal government, and the state government to provide money for rebuilding our infrastructure and getting these things done and taking care of this situation. Thank you.
Mr. Rossi.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to come here to speak with you about this very relevant issue. This has been I'm running for District 89, and just in case anybody doesn't know, District 89 represents the vast majority of Palm Beach County coastline. One of the reasons why I'm running is for this issue, because I am an older millennial. I'm 33 years old, and we are very concerned in this generation about the future of our coastlines, about the future that this issue will impact an entire generation. The fact of the matter is that what we have been responsible for, if anybody's read The Waters Will Come by Jeff Goodall, he talks about this and he addresses this specifically in saying that what we have done is directly impacted, consequentially so, the fact that we are facing an interruption in the natural rhythm of our environment because of the things that we've done over the past 10, 20, 30, 40 years. What we need to do now is one thing that politicians are scared to talk about on issues like this, which is money. It's going to cost a great deal of money and cooperation with our local governments, our state governments, and certainly at the federal level to make sure that the right funds are appropriated to districts like District 89 to make sure that we're spending and allocating that money where it needs to go to protect our beaches, to fight and combat saltwater intrusion, which is another serious issue that we're facing here in District 89. We don't want any of that to get into our freshwater drinking sources. A lot of those wells need to be moved out west. We simply can't afford it if the sea levels continue to rise as they have. The problem is that many people only want to look in the short term. They only want to look at short-term fixes, what's going to buy you time, 3 years, 5 years. We need to start investing money to some of these infrastructure projects for 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. And right now, I don't think that Palm Beach County has done enough of that. We have in Miami and Broward, but I don't think we've done enough in Palm Beach County.
Tough issue, simple question based on part of what you said. How many of you are willing, show of hands, to go to your constituents and say, we're going to need more money, more of your tax money to make hardening of infrastructure, to make this a reality? Show of hands, how many are going to be willing to say to constituents, it's going to take more of your money to make this happen mid and long term? Show of hands? Is there every hand up? And also a question, well, We'll talk a little bit more about that. We want to talk more in detail about it.
Not mine.
Not mine. I didn't think I saw. Why not yours?
I think everybody out there is paying enough in taxes.
This is a critical issue, and I was listening to the laundry list of things you all think need to be done. Why do you think it can happen without everybody in Florida digging deeper into their pocket to make it happen? Sir.
Okay, Mike Caruso. I'm a forensic CPA. We have an $89 billion budget in the state of Florida. We, in my experience as a forensic CPA, I've spent my life looking into fraud, waste, and duplicity in large organizations and businesses, and there's always fraud, waste, and duplicity in every organization. When I get to Tallahassee, my plan is to find that fraud, waste, and duplicity, allocate funds better, more appropriately, and not continue to tax the citizens of the Palm Beaches.
Isn't that the no pain, no gain message we heard all the way up to candidates running for federal office? That we won't have to do anything, we'll just eliminate fraud and waste, and it won't cost you a dime, won't hurt you a bit.
I understand that, and I truly respect that thought. However, it also is about prioritizing dollars, and we need to prioritize dollars.
Anybody? I saw some hands going up in disagreement, I presume. Go ahead.
I don't think it's, certainly I agree on prioritizing how we spend our money, but I'm in real estate. That's what I do. I was a high school teacher for several years, and now I do real estate full time. I can assure you that this is a nonpartisan issue, whether you're Republican, whether you're Democrat. If you own property in this district on the coastline, you're concerned about what's happening. And if we don't do something about it in the short term, even right now, you're going to see property values continue to decline. And nobody wants to see their property values decline.
Allowing everyone to answer this question, we'll move back down this end of the table. Let me encapsulate that it'll be the tax question as well. And just to further add some meat to that question, our organizers have asked, under what conditions do you feel it's appropriate to use tax dollars to fund sea level rise resilience activities? What, if any, would you champion in the state legislature to fund sea level rise and flooding resilience efforts? So we'll move back down here. Mr. Bonfiglio, we'll start here and then move back up and down the table.
Thank you. Jim Bonfiglio. Florida, for bad or good, has made a policy decision to allow people to live along the coastline and allowed unfettered growth to draw down in the aquifer. So with that policy decision in mind, Florida's got to fund the solutions to this problem. This is a man-made problem, and it's a problem that man has to solve. Now, there are a number of avenues that I've talked about with respect to where we can get funds for this that don't necessarily need to raise taxes. For example, once you legalize recreational marijuana, if we use Colorado as the model, and compare the population, it should raise about $1 billion in tax revenue for recreational use of marijuana. Second thing we can look at for an additional source of funds is going to be the Supreme Court gave us a windfall of allowing sports betting. Once you deal with the $300 million exclusivity we've given to Seminoles, my guess is that it'll be a factor of $300 million if we legalize sports betting in the state. That'll be another source of revenue. So there are sources of revenue that we can use to increase the budget without technically increasing taxes. Thank you.
Ms. Koch.
I think this is an issue critical to all those of us who live on the coast. And if we do not solve this problem, it will haunt our children, provided there's still a peninsula to live on. I think that one of the solutions is to raise our street levels. They did this in Miami. The mayor there asked for $750 million to match his $750 million. The state didn't give it to him, but he did what he could with the money that he had and raised his street level. This is an issue that maybe we'll legalize marijuana, recreational marijuana. We'll certainly have sports betting here. There's an amendment for gambling. All of these things are potential ways, but if those don't work, we need to drive revenue so that this no longer is an issue our children and our grandchildren will be dealing with and beyond.
Well, I think preventive maintenance is a lot cheaper than corrective maintenance. And if you're talking about the gambling, and there is a lot of waste everywhere, but, you know, it's always going to be waste. I'm sorry. It's always going to be waste. We can get money from the sale of marijuana. We can get money from lotteries. That's smoke screen that's there. We can get money from a lot of different places. But what we have to realize that if we don't start taking care of our properties now, then in the future, it's going to be a lot worse. So I'm thinking I would be more than happy to ask ask the citizens for money, for taxes.
And let me ask, we presume because we're at this conference, again, a show of hands, I'll make sure I catch everyone. The presumption is, but let me ask, does everyone at this table, Mr. Powell, we'll have you do an opening statement in a moment, does everyone at this table agree that human-induced climate change is part of the issue we're dealing with sea level rise, that fossil fuel use and the like? How many subscribe and agree that there's a definite human component to this? Everyone here at the table agrees with that. Mr. Powell joining us. Opening thoughts, and in fairness, the question to you, please introduce yourself, and then in 90 seconds, and it's a very loud cowbell, so it has to be 90 seconds or less, so they'll ring you silent. What do you think are the most important solutions at the state level to address sea level rise and flooding, sir?
Thank you. My name is Bobby Powell, Jr., State Senator for District 30. I am the current state senator. Of course, I need to answer the question while I do the introduction as well.
Yes.
Okay, give me that question one more time.
What do you think are the most important solutions at the state level to address sea level rise and flooding?
Perfect. One of the most important things that we can do to address sea level rise would be, if we got different ramifications, we can purchase more land. We can also, as we purchase that land, make sure that we've got best management practices in place. So we've got sea level rise, we've got areas where there's flooding, areas where different things that we've done to continue to increase climate change, things that we've done that have caused climate change, we can calm those down. We've also got the ability at the state level to create laws that, I don't want to say overrule home rule, but we've got the ability to create laws throughout the state that will put environmental practices, environmental reforms on some of these things that we're doing home to prevent sea level rise and to prevent climate change. Also at the state level, when it comes to our governor, we've got to have a governor who believes in climate change, who won't make it illegal for the Department of Environmental Protection to put practices in place that will prevent climate change. And we've also got to deal with, as a planner, I'm an AICP certified planner, we've got to deal with science. We have to have real life people who know what's happening to come up with solutions to stop this and mitigate some of these impacts that we've had on the environment.
Briefly, we talked about the fact that none of this comes cheaply. Are you willing to say to constituents, we're going to need more of your tax dollars in the years to come to harden infrastructure, to make these kind of changes, to purchase land? What is your take on that?
This year we were able to put $100 million into the Florida Forever program, where we were able to purchase more land. Also, one of the bills that I was able to pass this year was the Land Acquisition Trust Fund grant. We passed the bill in 2013 for Land Acquisition Trust Fund. This amendment will put it in there in perpetuity because it would have lasted only 5 years. So in 2019, it would have ended. This will put it in there forever. So we have the ability to buy land. We have an $88.7 billion budget this year. Every year when we deal with the budget, we have a certain amount of money that we put in reserve, but we also have a certain amount of money that we put there for land purchases. One of the things that was good this year is that our chair of the appropriations chair was happy on the Senate side that we were able to put $100 million into the Florida Forever Land Program. And as we move forward, this year you've even seen that the governor has been fluid on this issue. We haven't been able to really say climate change.
But to my question, if it takes more tax money to point, this is a long-term issue, and if you have to look your constituents in the eye and say, we're all going to have to dig deeper, are you willing to do that?
Absolutely. But what I'm also telling you is that not only do we have to dig deeper, we've got money in the budget. We put $3 billion in the reserves this year.
Let's move on to another question that we'll start with Mr. Rossi and move back down to this end of the table. Our organizers said, according to flood IQ data, A Category 3 hurricane would cause flooding in 9,304 homes in Palm Beach. They talk about that flood IQ data saying in the year 2032, a Cat 3 hurricane would cause flooding in over 9,000 homes. Some of you have touched on it already with some of your opening thoughts, but talk more about what we can do now to protect these areas. We'll begin with you, Mr. Rossi, and then move back down to the center of the table.
I'm sorry, protect the areas.
What can we do now to protect these areas that, as these charts show, if you get a Cat 3, could be catastrophic flooding for many thousands of homes in Palm Beach County? And that's the numbers today. As the growth continues to happen, the problem grows that much greater along our coastline.
Well, sure, and I've said this since we started this campaign. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we've gotten fortunate, I think, over the last couple of years with having some near misses or partial impacts, but the fact of the matter is that it's only a matter of time before a larger impact storm is able to come to the coast here in Palm Beach County and leave its effects to be critically devastating to many of the residents that live here. The fact of the matter is that there's a lot of properties in Palm Beach County. As I said, I'm in real estate, so I deal with it quite often. And many of the folks here on the here in Boca, Del Rey, up the coast, are very concerned what a large storm might bring as far as flooding issues, as far as what happened to the property damage.
Sir, with respect, though, to the question, what do you think are the most important solutions to deal with that issue as outlined by them? What can we do now to protect those areas in your estimation?
Well, I think that the way that the flooding zones are set up, I mean, certainly I know a lot of people were not in flood zones at one time. Now that they are, they have to shell out quite a bit of money to make sure that their properties are well insured for flood insurance. And it's a costly venture, and I think that we ought to be doing better than we're doing.
Mr. Caruso.
Yes, to get ready for the, as you say, 2032, over 9,000 homes will suffer the effect of flooding. I think we need to focus on our infrastructure. We need to increase the height of seawalls along the intercoastals, and we need to improve our beaches and the dunes on the beaches. We need to make sure that they've got the proper plantings on them. We need beach renourishment to build up those dunes. Other things that we can do are working on our drainage and sewage systems. Right now, there's on the seawalls along the intercoastals, there's these valves that go. When the water is above the valve, they close, and it keeps water from going up the drainage and into people's yards. And when the water's below it, they open up. So if there's a rain, the water can drain off. What we need to do is to make sure that those valves currently, many of them are malfunctioning. They don't work. They're broken. And when the canal intercoastal does rise, the water goes right up into the people's yards. So we need to work on our infrastructure.
And a clarification, that's 9,304 homes. The chart and the question are slightly different. We're actually talking about 12,000 homes, Cat 3 hurricane in 2032. And I think even our organizers agree that might not even be worst case scenario. We're talking a Cat 3. If it's a Cat 4 or 5, the amount of flooding could be far more catastrophic than that. But the same question to you, Mr. Bonfiglio, as we look at that, can we do now to protect these areas ahead of those kind of scenarios?
Yeah, here are some of the things we've done in Ocean Ridge to protect from the surges from the hurricanes. We've encouraged homeowners to plant things like sea oats, plants that preserve the dune and keep the effect of the surge down. We've also preserved a large swath of protected mangroves to keep the surges down from the intercoastal to protect the homeowners. There's also another program that I just found out about. I was looking this information up. There are scientists working on developing the kind of like artificial reefs that you plant. They're like concrete. You plant them about 6, 8, 12 feet out into the ocean that help break up the surge so it isn't nearly as high. And they're being fairly successful with those in breaking up the surge. And I'd like to see the results of that. Perhaps that's something we can do here in South Florida, and it's not very expensive, especially if they're concrete. And when you use them as an artificial reef, it also encourages the sea life to grow right off the beach. So those are some kinds of things I think we can do.
Ms. Koch.
You know, this is such an, I can't believe we're answering this question. I can't believe we're in this place. I have to say that one of the solutions that I think works, it's worked in other places, in other countries, is tidal basins, where we have places to hold large amounts of water. But I will say, in Boca Raton, where I live, they were taking down a golf course. Many people wanted a vacant piece of property there to hold the water, but were not allowed to do that. They're going to build homes on them. It's all a money game, just like the taxes, and we have to come up with some agreement that there has to be something done. Planting mangroves, doing all those things are good solutions, but they're not enough solution to solve a problem of a Cat 3 hurricane destroying 9,000 people's homes.
Mr. Powell.
Thank you. When I was in school, one of the books that we studied was called Design by Nature. It was a book by Ian McCarr. And what that book talks about is the natural environment, the built environment, and how to design things as you move forward. We talked about the dunes and sea level. One of the things when you think about, we have a lot of beachfront property, and that has taken away from the natural flow of the coastline. And that would have sometimes broken up some of those waves and some of that wind that comes in. So it becomes a part about the design as we continue to develop and build, but it also is a part of our communities, our municipalities, our counties that have the ability to deal with their land use, their zoning and land development regulations to make sure that we change this. We deal with the Department of Economic Opportunity, which is actually giving most of the power back to the local governments, but it's incumbent upon the state to make sure that our local governments have the ability to deal with these infrastructure issues. And we talked about sea level walls, all these things we have to start building up in terms of preparing for resilience and the infrastructure for the next century or the next, however long it's going to take, because if we don't, the bottom half of Florida will be underwater pretty soon. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson.
Yes, I agree with what most everyone has said. The mangroves, the seawalls, pumping stations to get the water out of the properties. We also have to take advantage of our cars that we drive. We're going to have to start getting rid of this fossil fuel and these diesel fuels and create more carbon sinks, plant more trees so that they can hold the carbon and hold the water that's going. What we've done here is that a lot of the areas, we've just taken away the natural flow of the land, like the trees. We'll build all these properties, take all the trees out of the ground, and then after we took all the trees out of the ground, establish trees that have roots that can suck up the water and suck up this carbon. We'll do that, and then we'll plant a little small tree, the same tree that's the size of my hand, and we'll put it there, and then we expect it to grow. And I really don't understand that, and I think those are some of the things we need to start doing.
I'd like a brief, just so that we can work in a few more questions before we get into the audience. And we've got about 20 minutes, so we're trying to manage time just a bit here. But I'd like a brief answer. We're not going to go a minute, but this is a topic I'm sure all of you have been asked about at some point or another, but we'll ask again. In 2009, shortly before Deepwater Horizon, the Florida legislature, as our organizers note, moved to open our nearshore waters to offshore oil and gas exploration. Now on the ballot in November, the Constitutional Revision Committee has placed an amendment to permanently ban nearshore drilling off our coast. What's your position on nearshore drilling? Very briefly. We'll begin with you.
Ban it.
Senator?
Thank you. It's an issue that we've worked on trying to ban in the legislature, so if we can get the people who will vote on this revision from the Constitutional Revision Commission to ban it, then we should ban it. But we've tried to pass legislation in the Senate and the House over the last 3 years. So this time we are hopeful that the people, the residents and the citizens of the state of Florida will ban it.
Ms. Koch.
Yes, I would, and that would be yes on 8, I believe.
I would ban it, except perhaps 500 feet or so off Mar-a-Lago.
Mr. Russo?
As the only Republican up here, It's going if that happens off the Mar-a-Lago, the Gulf Stream goes north, so all the sludge is going to come up here to North Palm. So we don't want that anywhere. We don't want it anywhere. Ban it, ban it, ban it. It's I know it's surprising to hear from a Republican, but absolutely, we don't want that mess on our beaches and the harmful effects it has on wildlife.
Quickly, though, begs the question, why don't lawmakers do it themselves? Oftentimes, there are many complaints that we lard the constitutional revisions in the state with things politicians don't want to touch, Democrats or Republicans for that matter. Your take on that?
I don't see it. I think it's common sense. It's, we've got, there's plenty of places to drill for oil.
But if it's common sense, why didn't all lawmakers of whatever stripe come together and do it?
And when have you seen common sense legislation hit our shores? No offense, Senator.
Mr. Rossi.
Ban it. I would support the ban on it.
The state legislature, as our organizers know, has implemented or attempted to implement a number of preemptions on environmental issues, preemptions on regulating plastic bags, fertilizer, polystyrene, aka styrofoam. We'll get to the audience stuff in a moment. AKA styrofoam. What is your opinion on home rule versus state control on environmental issues, especially in regard to sea level rise issues? We'll begin at the other end of the table. Mr. Rossi, specific to that question, which I gather one of our audience members very keenly would like to hear an answer to. Your opinion on home rule versus state control on environmental issues, especially in regards to sea level rise.
Well, look, if the state government can't be responsible for solving many of these problems, let the local municipalities do it. And the fact of the matter is that the state government hasn't been responsible with where many of these things are concerned. So I think that we ought to make sure that the local governments have some say in what happens. We ought to leave the control in their hands, and if they are the ones that are going to be most responsible for passing something that I think pertains to sea level rise specifically, or any of our environmental concerns, they're the ones that are closest to it, not the people that are sitting in Tallahassee, even though I'm running for that position, then I think that we should leave it in the hands of our local officials, absolutely.
Mr. Caruso.
Although I believe in home rule, I think that, running our government at the local level is fundamental to our society. I think that the issue that you're talking about with regards to plastics and styrofoam should be dealt with at the state level. And I think that we need to set standards at the state level, making a statewide ban on things like styrofoam let's mandate that we use as much paper instead of plastic as possible. But then, as on the national level and the world level, it's China. Go back to China. They dump more plastic into the ocean than we would in the next 20 years. They do it each year, and it's the ocean's their dumping ground. And we've got to really get a handle from a worldwide perspective of the impact of plastics on our environment, and we need to address it. President Trump needs to address it with China and India and other countries that just use the ocean as a dumping ground.
Mr. Bonfiglio.
I'm a local rule guy since I've been involved in Ocean Ridge politics for 18 years. I strongly believe in ocean rule, but local rule. But when you're dealing with pollution issues and sea level issues, which affect the state and cross governmental unit lines, Palm Beach County lines, municipality lines, you need at least a minimum standard that the state can set, and perhaps allow each governmental unit to give more protection, not less protection. And when the state mandates it, the state needs to make sure the local municipalities, the local governments, local governmental units have enough money to meet that governmental mandate. That's where I would stand.
Ms. Koch.
I remember years ago when we were in a drought, and when you went into a restaurant, you had to say, "Can I have some water, please?" Because they wouldn't bring you a glass of water. I'm amazed at the number of restaurants in the last 30 days that I have walked into that say you must ask for a straw for your drink. So I have to say that although I support local rule most of the time, There should also be statewide minimums that we should be abiding by, but I have to say, people shop in places where you can't use plastic bags. It's perfectly okay to ask them to carry a cloth bag. This needs to move, ladies and gentlemen, on people power. And I think that if we do that, and we ask our state to give us mandatory minimums, that it'll happen.
Senator?
Thank you. That's a good question. I know in 2011, before I got in the legislature, that's back when I was young. I wasn't even in my 30s. The Growth Management Act gave the power back, dealing with local governments and local control, gave all the planning powers back to the state, the municipalities, and took it away from the state. So I believe in this instance that the municipalities, we have people, I was a former city planner for West Palm Beach, and planners, some of the smartest people in the world, y'all, are smart enough to deal with these issues. And I think that the local planning departments will get together, and we have an APA conference, and I believe that if we let the locals have that, then they'll be able to handle it. The local municipalities know what to do when it comes to local control with regard to banning any materials. But I don't believe that the state should be preempting and picking and choosing which regulations it takes away from. So I would support local control. I am a local control person. Of course, the League of Cities has recognized me every year that I've been in the legislature, and the Florida Association of Counties has recognized me as a county champion. So I always support home rule.
Thank you very much. Mr. Anderson?
Well, I believe in local control. But this is where we need to start bridging our communities, our governments. We need to bridge together so that everybody can make informed decisions of what's good for our different municipalities. You asked a question a few minutes ago about common sense. I mean, that's all it takes, is common sense. And if we do that, then we'll get rid of a lot of the plastic and the styrofoam. A cigarette filter, if you throw it on the ground, it's going to take about 100 years before it deteriorates. So just think about the plastic, and just think about the styrofoam.
Just a quick question, because for this audience, they want lawmakers who can go and represent their interests best. How many of you would be willing and candid enough to concede that you have to really come up to speed on all of these issues, and that, frankly, lawmakers at the local, state, and indeed federal level need to do a lot more in terms of coming up to speed? Just briefly, I mean, do you concede that this is something you're still grappling with and really need to learn a lot more about to represent properly the concerns you see expressed here tonight?
Yes, I'm not a scientist, and I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to learn.
What's your biggest blind spot right now where you need to come up to speed?
Well,
Very briefly.
I think, as we were just talking about the plastic and the plastic and the styrofoam, I think I need to learn more and more about it and figure out what we can do.
Senator, your biggest blind spot where you need to come up to speed?
Thank you. Well, what I can tell you is that in the legislature, each of us has specializations, right? About 25% of the legislature are attorneys, and we deal with a gambit of different issues, from agriculture to environmental to appropriations to science. What I can tell you is that when you talk about climate change, it's a specialization that we have to continue to study. It's not something that each and every one of us will know about. Some of our districts don't necessarily have to deal with it. Even here, we deal with sober homes. In the northern part of the state, Walton County and those different areas don't have to deal with those things. So I would say not only this issue, but every issue that we deal with.
But how do you all deal with the polarizing divide? There was a Gallup poll I looked up today this year that suggests that polarization, like everything else, is environmental issues. You can talk about sea level rise, you can talk about what all of you will do there, but I think the poll said 69% of Republicans now think climate change, sea level rise, of course, part and parcel of that, is exaggerated. Democrats only about 4%. So you have a polarization there. How do you lead and how do you convince constituents that we've got to change those poll numbers, we've got to change all of our thinking? Let me let Ms. Koch take that on quickly, and then we'll move on, because there's a big gap, and that means you need to be educated, check your blind spots, and do that. But how do you do all that?
Well, you know, part of it is education, don't you think? And a great part of it is you know, what I said originally, answering the first question, our governor denies climate change, which gives everybody else a shadow that they can stand in. And they don't have to say, oh yeah, I'm going to go against him. And they don't go against
But
him.
where do you need to learn more?
So I need to learn more about the technical aspects of what to do, the solutions, okay? Because I don't have enough breadth of knowledge when it comes to solutions for climate change. And I'm a really good listener. And I can do research. I'll even do Senator Powell's research. But but at the end of the day, I still have a very limited scope. So I really need some support in solving the problem.
Mr. Bonfiglio, the blind spots and the polarization, how do you deal with both of those, both on a personal level as a leader and also as somebody who needs to make sure constituents rally around the issue that brought us here tonight?
Right. Well, as I said, I've been working with this issue with our town engineer in Ocean Ridge for the last 18 years, dealing with, you know, all the attendant flooding issues, sea level rise, our detention pond. The freshwater table has risen almost 2 inches because of the saltwater intrusion. So we've had to deal with that issue. Renourishment of the beaches, beach erosion. I've had to deal with all those issues in either as planning and zoning chairman or as a town commissioner. So I think I can hit the ground running pretty good on that. One thing that I'm not real good on is the injection wells to force the fresh water back into the aquifer. I'm not really sure how that...
The Florida aquifer is one of the suggestions up around the lake.
Yes,
Yep.
to restore the
big lake,
freshwater
Lake Okeechobee.
balance to the aquifer and to try to push back on the pressure from the salt water pushing in on the limestone. That's one of the areas that I'm not a scientist, I'm a lawyer, so that's one of the things I'm going to have to learn on.
Mr. Caruso, briefly, I'd like to get an audience question, and we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the crisis going on our Treasure Coast. So briefly on this.
Well, first about the polarizing politicians out there. I'm personally tired of the 5% on the right and 5% on the left trying to control the 90% of us in the middle. They're the ones shouting the loudest, and they make so much noise we can't hear each other. And I think, you know, as we've done tonight, we've heard a lot of good ideas and have a lot of common ground. And I think that's what we need to do, is to ignore the 5 on the left and 5 on the right and get together and come up with common sense solutions that'll work. We need to turn to science and continue to study the causes of sea level rise. And we need to look towards our engineers towards solving the effects of sea level rise. And one thing that I guess the area that I feel I need to work on is I want to learn more about the insurance and that we all need in order to cover our property and how we can keep the cost of that insurance down. And so that's one of the areas I want to look into more.
Mr. Rossi?
Well, the good news is that I think we're taking a step in the right direction by having events like this. And further good news is the fact that all of us that sit on this panel are on the right side of this issue. So to that end, I think that we are making progress. We just have to keep talking about it. You know, I think too often we get complacent, too often we sit on the sidelines where these issues are concerned, and we need to be motivated and engaged, and we need to talk to our officials. And for somebody like me, we need to spend more time on the ground, talking with folks that are actually directly impacted by these issues, and hearing what their concerns are, hearing what their ideas for solutions are, and then measuring that out and if we're fortunate enough to represent all the folks in Tallahassee, then making the proper decisions going forward.
We will save talking to our congressional candidate a little bit more in the next segment, just because we have to marshal our time somewhat about the algae crisis on the Treasure Coast. I want to get to a few audience questions. One said, the first one, and I'll try and do them in order, Florida's #2 ag economy, ground zero for sea level rise in USA. How can we protect farmers? This participant in tonight's forum asked, especially small organic farmers, from threats of flooding, land development pressure, saltwater intrusion. I can't, with time, go through all 6. Who'd like to tackle that one? Go ahead. All right, Mr. Rossi? Whoever, jump on it.
I guess I get that one. All right. Unfortunately, the farmers are actually part of the problem with respect to the algae blooms in Lake Okeechobee, because the farms are leaching nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus into the water system that feeds Lake Okeechobee. What I think we need to do is provide for a drainage system so that water doesn't go directly into the lake and cause the algae blooms. We have to take that water, treat it before it goes back into the Lake Okeechobee system. That's one of the things we can do for the farmers. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot of money for that in the current legislature, because that's going to be a big dollar item to clean up the water.
Another question here, another audience participant asks and says coasts are not the only place water can come from. It can come from the Everglades. You touched on that a bit. A recent FIU study, they say, revealed sea level rise is outpacing Everglades restoration. Given that, they ask, and other studies, they say that state we have a guaranteed 6 to 10 foot level rise for 2100. How can we protect both South Florida from the sea and protect the Everglades as well? That dual purpose challenge. And I heard somebody say we can't. I think I heard somebody say. Who wants to tackle that one?
Well, one of the things I want to talk about is we do have legislation, the right to farm legislation, and of course we can say that a lot of this is the fault of farmers, but I somewhat disagree with that, because we also have to eat. Also, water flows south. Everything flows south. So in order to restore the land the way it used to be, we got 20 million people in the state of Florida. We're the third largest state in the nation. We didn't have that many people, not even 10 years ago. Every 10 years we do a census. We'll do one in 2020. So as the population continues to grow, people have to have a place to go. And as we continue to build on land, the pressures of development, we continue to expand west, even here in Palm Beach County. That land, once you build, you have water runoff, you have different things that happen. We even talk about saltwater intrusion. We have retention ponds. There are best management practices that we continue to put in place. But one of the biggest problems that you're going to have is people are continuing to move to Florida. We still have to grow. And guess what? People don't want to build up here in Florida. People want to build out.
But there's a certain altitude to which you can't go any farther west, because you're precisely to your point. You're in the Glades and impacting on that. We already really are. In fact, when we talk about the Everglades, we forget that there was a small coastal plain 150 years ago, and that most of us would be sitting in the Everglades, not really very far from where I sit right now. Well, Mr. Caruso, you wanted, let me let him jump in, because we're going to have to end the forum here with this group, and I apologize for that. There's so many good questions. I want to get to one audience question. This came to you, Mr. Caruso. When were the FEMA flood insurance rate maps last updated? This was for candidate Caruso. How will that impact sea level rise? In fact, there was a recent study suggests that rates could shoot up in the next few years, as there's much talk yet again about quitting the subsidy of flood-prone properties. So the question, when were FEMA flood insurance rates maps last updated? And should we see the rates and the cost of insurance go up on our coastline in order to drive people away from those flood-prone areas that are being subsidized by others?
Well, a couple things we need to do. As to when it was last updated, I know it's at least 10 years old. And I know that many of the 100-year floodplains are now 10-year floodplains when they've flooded twice in the last 10 years. We need to look at it, like I mentioned, from a perspective of preparing for this sea level rise, and that means changing our construction codes to build on higher elevations and putting pressure on. We ask, where's the money going to come from? And we talk about, developers like GL Homes or something like that. They come in to communities and build 10,000 homes. And then they take their millions, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars of profits and move on to the next city and leave them with the mess of infrastructure. We need to put more pressure on them. I don't want to tax the people that live here. I want to tax the people that come in here like GL Homes and develop these communities in the terms of impact, infrastructure impact fees. And more than what we do now. We have an impact fee that is so modest and so minimal.
Time's up on that, but very quickly, this question, real estate's one of the legs of our economy, and there's a lot of talk and it pertains to sea level rise. In a very quick show of hands or response, do you support allowing those rates, as one study suggests is going to have to happen in 2020. There was a recent federal report that there'll be a push for this, to raise rates sharply to more accurately reflect the flood-prone risk along our coastline. That would have a huge impact for people's pocketbooks here. But do you support that idea as a long-term solution to helping drive people away from the flood-prone coastlines where sea level rise could have the most tremendous impact? It's going to have an impact on our real estate industry. Where do you stand very briefly? I see you frowning, Senator, and Ms. Koch, well, quick take. Very quick take.
There's got to be another solution because already here in the state of Florida, in Palm Beach County, the average home price is somewhere between $350,000 to $380,000. So when you talk about increasing and rising insurance rates, we've got to figure out a way, maybe a state way to help insulate that, but I'm not in favor of increasing insurance prices because at some point, people have to be able to live, and already in Palm Beach County, people can't afford to live. I know I'm a homeowner, but it's very difficult for some people to own homes.
Mr. Rossi, final word, and then we're going to wrap it with this group.
Well, I have to agree with the senator. I mean, that's exactly what's happening. The rates continue to rise and people continue to sell. And right now, I mean, as a realtor, I know the market's pretty well. There's a huge amount of inventory out there, especially on the coast. People just can't afford it and they're leaving. And it's very problematic.
But do we want them on our coastlines when you have sea level rise and artificially subsidized rates that have made it too easy to build in flood-prone areas?
Well,
now even more prone to the vicissitudes of nature because of sea level rise? Shouldn't you want them to move away from there?
Well, that's a good question, and I guess we'll have to wait and see what the answer is.
But your answer as a realtor and a potential lawmaker is no.
No, I mean, I don't want to see people move from their homes, to other locations. I mean, I think that there are other solutions that we can put in place to try to mitigate all the things that are happening with sea level rise right now.
And mitigate the impact on those pocketbooks for those
Right,
homeowners.
of course. Yeah.
I know all of you, you can grab them on the way out. We've got to get our congressional candidate in. We thank you for taking your time. How about a big round of applause for all of our candidates?